Okay, so this is the Bible study for Matthew chapter 21, verses 18 through 27. And the text for today says, "Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, 'May you never bear fruit again.' Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. 'How did the fig tree wither so quickly?' they asked. Jesus replied, 'Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer.' Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and the elders and the people came to him. 'By what authority are you doing these things?' they asked, 'and who gave you this authority?' Jesus replied, 'I will ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or of human origin?' They discussed it among themselves and said, 'If we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin, we are afraid of the people, for they hold that John was a prophet.' So they answered Jesus, 'We don't know.' Then he said, 'Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things.'" Okay, so that's our text, and so there we go. That's what we're going to do. Number one, in our Bible study, remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And number one says, what did we talk about last week in Matthew 21:12 through 17? Honestly, I really don't want to get into that again. Which, for whatever reason, maybe because you didn't like what we actually were told that we needed to take from it. Maybe you don't like the contentiousness of what it was, because be flipping tables and stuff like that. Maybe it felt like a charged argument. If you've been around the church for a long time, then you know that the church has largely interpreted it wrong and in a legalistic way, to do sometimes exactly the opposite of what was intended. And so maybe you don't agree with this interpretation of it. Maybe you don't like the contentious feeling of talking about it in front of people that might think differently. I don't know. Maybe you don't want to get into it again. See how to not be somebody that Jesus flips tables on. I think that's a good way to put it, although I couldn't read it very well. For real, and not a shallow interpretation that involves legalism and misses the whole point. So in other words, if this is something that Jesus cares about that much, then let's talk about it for real and make sure that we're not the people that he's talking about, that he would come in and flip tables on us. And let's not take it maybe at face value. Let's read the depth of it, and let's not, I really think that people that are trying to stop children from fundraising in the sanctuary think that they're doing a good thing and trying to make sure Jesus doesn't flip the tables on us. But I can only say that it must be ignorance. Sometimes when we've tried to teach it, it's become not ignorance but stubbornness, and unwillingness to see anything but what I think and what I want to interpret this as. I'd rather interpret this as a way to criticize the kids or stop some kind of outreach thing from happening in the sanctuary than to actually ask myself, is my life such that when I come in and worship, there's authenticity about it, or am I living a ungodly life through the week and then coming in and acting like I'm safe in front of God? So number two, let's move on to today's Bible study. Number two, what happens next according to 21:18 and 19? A, early in the morning, Jesus was on the way back into the city. Yes. B, Jesus was hungry. Yes. C, Jesus saw a fig tree by the road. Yes. D, Jesus went up to the fig tree but found nothing on it except leaves. Yes. E, Jesus said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Well, this, if you thought you were getting out of the contentious passages or difficult passages, I'm sorry. F, immediately, or at least by the next day, according to Mark, the tree withered. So, we could argue about what is meant by immediately, or, whether it just kind of went while they were standing there. Or if by the next day when they came back, as Mark describes it, they noticed that the tree was already withered within a day, which is not usually the way trees wither. But anyway, that's sort of cross-referencing that text with Mark. We see a different story, but I don't think it's not usually, those are not usually listed under the controversial texts that tell a completely different story, because I think we can sort of merge those and make sense of it. Number three, how did the disciples respond? According to 21:20, it says, when the disciples saw this, they were amazed. How did the fig tree wither so quickly, they asked. So they were amazed, and they asked, how did this happen? This seems to be, they didn't ask why, which was interesting, because I would have asked, Jesus, like, cool it. What are you, what's going on? Well, number four kind of covers that. How would you respond? Wow, that seems a little petty. If so I've heard this text preached on a lot, and a lot of theologians point out that the season was not a season where you would expect figs to be on the tree. So the tree was behaving really as it should have been behaving, and yet Jesus cursed it anyway. And so there are a lot of things that we can take from that. Jesus should have known, and that was really petty, it seems like. B says, don't get on Jesus's bad side. I would say that we could say something for the idea that Jesus expects fruit, even when we could completely justify there being no fruit. That's something we could say about this. I'm not sure that's the point of the passage. It doesn't seem like the point of the passage based on how he responds to his disciples, but I think there's something to that. C. Those are my natural responses, but maybe Jesus had something to teach us about through all of this. So, what we know of the character and nature of Jesus. I know we just talked about him flipping tables, but a lot of people in talking about that have talked about, how long he stopped to fashion a whip. One of our gospels tells us. So there was time. So this wasn't a immediate petty angry reaction. This was a thoughtful response. And so in most of Scripture, where we hear the story of Jesus, we do not read the story of someone whose character is rash decisions and bursts of anger. When Jesus shows frustration and anger, it's for a purpose, and it's thought out, and it's what we would call righteous anger. In other words, he's not angry. He never gets angry when they're accusing him falsely. He gets angry when God's people are not treated fairly. He gets angry about the things that God, the Father, gets angry about. So I'm not sure that it like sort of follows with our understanding of Jesus's character and nature to believe that he just sort of all of a sudden rashly got angry at a tree and cursed it. But rather and I know that can seem like a stretch. We just like you just read it. That's what it sounds like. But maybe Jesus had a better plan. Maybe Jesus, I mean, he's getting down to the end of his life, and he's still got some things to teach his disciples about. Maybe he had a plan for all of this. Number 5, how did Jesus respond to his disciples according to 21, and 22? He says, if you have faith and don't doubt, you too can, and this is a paraphrase, have authority like this. In other words, you can do not only this, but B says this is a little thing. We can also tell mountains, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. So Jesus' response, their question is not, wow, why were you so petty? And let's just say that if it seemed like he was being petty, perhaps they would have asked that question. So maybe the story reads different to us than the way it looked to them. But he instead addresses the authority that he has over nature. And not only that, he stresses the fact that they too can and should have this authority. And where does the authority come from? See, Jesus says the power of God is available to us through prayer. So he clarifies that anything you ask for in prayer will be done. So he clarifies that this is not a power that belongs to us, it's a power that belongs to God that we have available to us. And perhaps the caveat is, if we go back to other texts where Jesus is addressing prayer, the caveat is if we ask according to his will. If we ask according to the heart and the desire of God. If we have not because we ask not, because when we do ask, we ask with wrong motives that we might use what we receive on ourselves. So, if we apply that text to this, then we might suggest that Jesus did not perhaps have, I don't know. Certainly we do not have the authority to do things according to our petty desires or frustrations. We can't call down lightning on somebody that cuts us off in traffic. That's not the way it works. And Jesus, we don't think would do that. So what is he doing? He's demonstrating authority and power, which, by the way, ties this text to sort of the next, if you have an NIV Bible separate heading, which is once they get to the temple. Number 6, what happened according to 23 when Jesus entered the temple courts. While he was teaching, the chief priests and elders and the people came to him and asked him, by what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority? B, Jesus answered with a question. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or of human origin? So, I feel like this fig tree story, like if it was meant to be the point, should have been a longer story. We need more details. But if it was meant to be an illustration that tied to the next text, and really those two texts have the same point and the same theme, then I understand why it was brief, because we don't need to make the illustration the point. So sometimes when I'm preaching or teaching, I go down such a rabbit trail with a story that's supposed to be an illustration that people begin to think it must be the point, and it was only an illustration of a different point, or the point that it illustrates. And so I would say that's generally not good. If your story is so long it becomes the point when it was really supposed to be an illustration, then you missed it. So Jesus, this Matthew's telling this story about Jesus, and he moves on quickly without giving as many details as we would want, because we want this to be the point. So now he moves on, and they are questioning his authority. And the fig tree, the way Jesus applied the lesson of the fig tree was about authority and the availability of God's power to us. So if that's the point, then it really ties in really well. Number 7 says, why does he answer? Why does the answer to Jesus's question matter? So Jesus answers with a question. He says, "I'll tell you the answer if you tell me the answer to this. John's baptism, from God or from man? Is it human origin or is it from heaven?" And so the question is, was he just, being dodgy? Or what? So well, first of all, it was a trap, because either way they answered, it didn't look good for them. Let me just say, in case you're like, well, why did Jesus try to trap them? They trapped him. He turned the tables on them. So he wasn't just flipping tables, he was turning tables. So they asked him a question that if he answered it truthfully, they would get angry about and call him a blasphemer. And if he answered it untruthfully, then he loses sort of all influence and authority with the people. So he's in a place where he's got a choice. He can lie and lose his influence, which Jesus wouldn't do, or he can tell the truth and they have something to pin on him. So then he turns it around and asks them a question with the exact same implications. If they tell the truth, which is what they think, of course, if they say what they believe, that is the truth. Not, I believe they believe something that is not true. If they say it is of human origin, which is not the truth, but is what they believe, then everybody's going to get mad at them. And they lose influence with these people who all believe that John was doing something from God. If they say that it was from God, then he would say, it says, why didn't you believe him? Because remember, John said, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. John said, I'm the one that prepares the way. He says that there's a guy coming after me whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie. And so John's declaration was that Jesus was from God. So if they said he was from God, then they have to say Jesus is from God. If they say his baptism was of human origin, everybody's mad at him and they lose the influence with the people. So he just turned the table on them. So it was a trap, but it was a trap like they had just laid for him. So he said, I think about the Nike commercials with Michael Jordan and Mia Hamm, which probably dates me. Anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you. So these teachers of the law, these chief priests, asked Jesus a question. He's like, that was a good one. I got one for you. And he throws it right back at them. So B, well, because he seems to be pointing out that he, Jesus, should not be the only one with authority and power from heaven. Can we go back to the fig tree for a moment? So in other words, these chief priests affirm the power of God, But one of the reasons that people were following Jesus and the chief priests and teachers of the law were losing influence was because they didn't have that sort of authority. They were astounded when 12-year-old Jesus was talking in the temple courts because he spoke with authority. And throughout Jesus's life, that has been the thing that has sort of designated him, or been the thing that sort of was always weird about him, is that when he spoke with an authority that nobody else seemed to have. And so one of the aspects of the sort of religious culture of that time was that God has authority, we have nothing. And so it was normal for them not to carry any authority from God, even though they were the religious leaders, which is odd. We know that the priests had, some pretty big roles and really should have been carrying authority from God. And maybe they were okay with that. Maybe they knew that they should have authority, but they didn't want anybody else to have authority. They thought they were the only ones. So now what Jesus is pointing out is that the people see you and they don't think you have authority from God. They don't see power. They don't see, I've had my testimony, I've recorded my testimony before, and discussed the idea. Nope. I just dropped something and my dog's going to eat it. Nope. Sorry about that. So they have questioned. They have not had authority. So my testimony is that I struggled to believe in God because I didn't see the power of God at work in His church. And that was the same thing that these guys are going through, is that they didn't see the power of God at work in the people who were supposed to have the power of God. So now Jesus is saying, now you're supposed to have the power of God. Now I show up with authority and power from God, and you're challenged by that because you don't have authority and power from God. What about John the Baptist? Was his authority and power from God? Was what he did from God? Or was it of human origin? Well, we don't know. We don't want to say. Okay, guess what? People can be given authority by God. It's still God's authority. Like, we shouldn't get all cocky about it because it's not our authority. But God's intent was to dwell with His people, and when He dwelt with His people, people exercised authority from God. And so in the church, we recognize godly authority that He places on humans. In the Old Testament, they understood that in David. They understood that in Saul. They understood that there was authority that was vested in humans by God. And so this reinforces what Jesus was trying to teach His disciples with the olive tree. He says, you guys can have this kind of authority. In other words, he's declaring that this authority is not just for the Son of God. This authority is not just for the Messiah, but this power and authority from God, bestowed upon people by God, can be available to you. And so, by the way, we're in 1 John right now. If you're studying this alongside of us, at the time when we're studying it, and in 1 John, there's a lot about the humanity of Jesus, and that we can feel Him, touch Him, hear Him, see Him, that sort of thing, but also the nature of Jesus being the Son of God, being from the beginning, the eternal life. So, we're not talking about that right here, but the whole point is there are things that Jesus had because he was Jesus, because he was the Son of God, because he was part of the Trinity, and there are things that Jesus had because the authority of God was on him, and those things can be available to us also because the authority of God can be on upon us by his Holy Spirit also. And so that's an important theological element that they apparently were struggling with. And I think sometimes, by the way, the church still struggles with today. So, number 8, how according to 21:27 did the chief priests and elders answer? They answered, "We don't know." Um, so then Jesus said, well, then I won't answer either. Why didn't Jesus answer? Well, honestly, he didn't answer for the same reason they wouldn't answer, because it was a trap to begin with. And he didn't feel obligated to answer a question that clearly was a trap. And by giving them a question they wouldn't answer, now if they said, you didn't answer the question, we're going to kill you. He said, well, you didn't answer my question either. What's going on here? I can throw this back at you. We both can give questions that are dangerous to answer, and so I'll answer if you answer. Otherwise, we can just all know what's really going on here. And I think, obviously, whenever there's a conversation and there's sort of these underlying things, there's always somebody who doesn't understand the cues. They don't understand the facial expressions. They don't. I know we have. We have a whole scale to talk about that in our modern times. So surely there were people that didn't follow what was going on underneath the surface. But I think a lot of the people there probably would have saw exactly what was going on underneath the surface, or at least once they went back and reflected on it. And we have it here to reflect on. We see what's going on underneath the surface. So yeah, I mean there's a lot going on here. There's a lot in this text, but I would say the most important thing to get from it is not just where did Jesus' authority come from, but let's talk about how that authority that Jesus had, that power and authority, he declared is available to us as well. And the teachers of the law and chief priests wanted to argue about it. They wanted to say, hey, this only belongs to us, or this doesn't belong to anybody but God. And Jesus is like, no, anybody who God gives this authority to, he offers it, and others can have it. And so that's a powerful thought.